The snowplow driver eased into a turnaround on Interstate 196 before dawn on February 1st, 1979. His headlights swept across the drifts, then froze on something pale jutting from the snow. He climbed down, boots crunching, and walked closer. An arm stuck out of the bank, fingers stiff, skin waxy in the beam. There were no tracks, no movement, only the idle of the truck in the dark. He climbed back into the cab, grabbed the radio, and told dispatch he had found a body. Hours earlier in Muskegon, Jim and Glenna Chandler were jolted awake by the phone. A Holland officer told them there had been a robbery at the Blue Mill Inn, where their daughter Janet worked nights at the front desk, and that Janet was missing. They dressed, woke their teenage son, Dennis, and drove toward Holland, scanning the shoulders for any sign of her. Janet was a senior at Hope College, a music major from a conservative Christian home, paying for school by working overnight at a modest motel that had recently filled with out-of-town security guards brought in for a labor dispute. By that winter, the Blue Mill Inn was dominated by those guards. They worked long shifts at a nearby plant and spent their off hours drinking and socializing in the rooms and lobby. Janet, young and friendly, worked the night desk with manager and roommate Lori Swank. She drew attention from some of the guards and from other employees. Behind the smiles, jealousy, and resentment built over who she spent time with and how comfortable she seemed among the men. The motel had become a closed world with its own rules. On the night of January 31st, 1979, Janet reported for the overnight shift. Guards lounged in the lobby, smoking and watching television. Swank moved in and out of the office. Later, witnesses would describe talk of a party for Janet that night, presented as a celebration. Shortly after 1 a.m., a guard called police claiming he had been on the phone with her when men stormed the lobby, announced a robbery, and dragged her away. Officers rushed to the motel and found the front desk area slightly disturbed and a small amount of cash missing, but no one else had seen unknown gunmen come or go. When word came from I-196 that a young woman had been found in a snowy turnaround, investigators quickly linked it to the missing clerk. Dental records confirmed the victim was Janet. An autopsy showed she had been strangled and that there were signs of recent sexual activity. The combination of a supposed motel robbery, a missing clerk, and a body dumped nearly 40 miles away jolted Holland and drew a full-scale investigation. Detectives began interviewing everyone tied to the Blue Mill Inn, from guards and motel staff to guests and Janet's friends at Hope College. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Witnesses described late-night parties in rooms, heavy drinking, and blurred lines between staff and guards who treated the motel as their territory. Some said Janet was trusting and sociable, trying to manage the attention. Others hinted at talk of teaching her a lesson, at jealousy over who she spent time with, and at a party that had turned ugly. Investigators filled binders with reports, but had no physical evidence they could tie to a suspect. When the strike ended, the guards left town, and without a confession or hard forensic links, the case stalled and slid into the cold case files. For more than 20 years, Janet's murder remained Holland's only unsolved homicide. Her photograph appeared in occasional stories about cold cases. Detectives reopened the file periodically, but the same obstacles remained. Witnesses who had not told everything, suspects scattered across other states, and a robbery story that never fit the scene. For the Chandler family, the unanswered questions became part of daily life. They knew how Janet's body had been found. They still did not know what had happened between the motel desk and the snowbank along I-196. In 2003, a Hope College communication professor, David Schock, offered his documentary film class a choice: make a routine project or investigate the unsolved murder of a former Hope student. The class chose Janet. They read old articles, met with Holland police, and sat in the Chandler's living room listening to parents who still lacked a clear account of their daughter's last night. With cameras rolling, the students tracked down former motel employees and others who remembered the Blue Mill Inn during the strike, asking what really happened there when the guards moved in. People who had stayed quiet in 1979 started talking on the record about the guards' behavior, the atmosphere in the motel, and a party arranged for Janet on the night she disappeared. The students cut their footage into an 80-minute film titled Who Killed Janet Chandler? It premiered at Hope's Knickerbocker Theater in January 2004 and later aired on public television. The documentary did not name killers, but it showed there were still witnesses with pieces of the truth. Publicity around the film pushed local and state agencies to form a cold case team, pull the old reports, and begin fresh interviews with former guards and motel workers. With time and distance from the strike, some witnesses were more willing to be specific. The robbery call, detectives concluded, was a scripted cover story. Janet had not been dragged away by unknown intruders. According to new statements, she had been lured from the desk by people she knew, taken to a room controlled by guards, assaulted by several men, strangled, and then driven to the I-196 turnaround where her body was dumped in the snow. For years, a group of people had carried pieces of that night without telling the full story. Now, one of them agreed to talk. Former guard Robert Lynch became the key. Confronted with the prospect of dying in prison, he chose to cooperate. He admitted being present and named others he said were involved: his supervisor Arthur Carl Paiva, fellow guards James Bubba Nelson, Freddie Parker, and Anthony Williams, and motel manager Lori Swank. According to Lynch and other witnesses, Swank helped set up the supposed party for Janet, knew what the men planned, and lied to police afterward. Her role brought the crime inside the motel staff itself, not just the ranks of the guards. With Lynch's statements, corroborating witnesses, and records placing the men in Holland, prosecutors finally had a case that could stand in court. Beginning in 2006, officers arrested Paiva, Nelson, Parker, Williams, and Swank in multiple states, while Lynch agreed to testify. In 2007, 4 of the guards went on trial for first-degree murder, and Swank faced second-degree murder under a plea deal. Jurors heard about the strike at the Blue Mill Inn, the party that turned into a group assault, the staged robbery call, and the threats that had kept staff quiet for nearly 3 decades. That fall, the jury returned guilty verdicts. Paiva, Nelson, Parker, and Williams were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Swank, who admitted luring Janet from the front desk and misleading investigators, received a term of years for second-degree murder. Lynch went to prison as well. Nearly 30 years after the snowplow driver saw an arm in a snowbank along I-196, the people responsible for Janet's death finally had their names read into the record. Nothing could restore the Hope College senior who sang in church and worked nights to pay for school. But Janet's murder was no longer a mystery in a file drawer. It was a solved case built on persistent detectives, a family that refused to let the investigation die, and a group of students who turned a classroom assignment into a catalyst for justice. For Jim and Glenna, that meant they no longer had to imagine her killers living anonymous lives somewhere else. The truth about what happened at the Blue Mill Inn had finally been dragged into the light. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.